Welcome to Judicial Dollars and Cents, brought to you by Anders Virtual CFO Services team from all across the United States. I'm John Scott, and in each episode, we'll shine a light on the financial side of the legal world, turning law firm numbers into impact-driven stories. From taxes and profitability to practice growth and leadership, we sit down with law firm innovators who are shaping the future of the profession. Let's dive in, right here on Judicial Dollars and Cents. Welcome back to Judicial Dollars and Cents. Today, we're sitting down with Catherine Hammond of the Hammond Law Group. She's an estate planning attorney based in Colorado Springs, Colorado, and she's here to discuss what thoughtful estate planning really looks like and why it matters more than people realize. Catherine breaks down common misconceptions around estate planning, the costly mistakes families often make by waiting too long, and how proactive planning creates clarity, protection, and peace of mind. Welcome, Catherine.
Thank you. It's great to be with you, John.
Hey, so today I want to get into estate planning, why it matters, even if you're not uber wealthy. But before we do that, I want to get into your origin story. How did you get here? In the words of talking heads, how did I get here?
Yes. So for me, it started when I was about 12 years old, and my mother cut an article out of the Denver Post about Alzheimer's disease, and she handed it to me and she said, "I think I have this." And being the ever so wise young adolescent that I was quite confident that my mom did not have this weird sounding disease. I thought she was just maybe crazy. By the time I was in college, she was put on disability from her job as a special education teacher. Oh. And when I was 22, we got the official Alzheimer's diagnosis, and she was no longer able to live on her own. And so I, upon referral from her doctor, had to call a lawyer and went through the whole conservatorship and guardianship process to ask for permission to sell my mom's house and move her into a nursing home. So I started on the other side of the table with a big fat mess. And I decided one day, sitting in my lawyer's conference room, that it would be helpful for me to try to make lemonade from these lemons, and decided to go to law school so that I could help other people with some of the messy parts of life. And the funny thing is, when I went to law school, I started law school in 1990. And back then, they didn't teach us that you could keep your family out of court if you're incapacitated and when you die. It was just assumed that you would go to court. And so that was my original goal. And then once I got out of law school, I figured out that you didn't have to be in the court system. So my passion became really educating people about how the system works and what your options are, so that you can make your own informed decisions about how you want things to go for your family.
Wow, what devastating news for a 12-year-old to get, but the foresight that your mother had and how in tune she was with what was going on. I mean, that's pretty incredible that she realized what was happening. Must have been really tough for her to go through.
Yeah, it was.
So when you plan with clients, what are the misconceptions they have? What do they get wrong about the whole process?
There are a lot of misconceptions. One of the big ones that people come in with is, if I have a will, that means I won't have to go through probate, right? Which is not correct. A will is just the guide that the court uses for the probate process. Another big misconception is that it's all about the documents. If I just have a document that says will or trust at the top, then I'm good to go. And what I have seen play out time after time over the last 30 plus years in practice is that, yes, the documents are important tools, but they're just tools within a larger plan. And you have to have all of the elements of the plan taken care of in order for those tools to work the way that you want them to work.
Yeah, those tools are great. And as a young accountant, I can tell you that I worked on many 706s, estate returns for clients. You know, we used to have a much smaller exemption. So if you owned a home, had a life insurance policy, you had an estate tax return to file. And many times they had an irrevocable trust, or even a revocable trust that turned irrevocable, but they had never funded it. They had never retitled assets. So they had the tool, but they didn't use it. So what's the ideal time to start planning your estate?
The ideal time to,
Go
yeah,
ahead.
the ideal time to start planning your estate is today. And that's if you are 18 or older, that is true. Because there are certain documents, even before you own property, there are certain documents that you need just for the basics of life. So think about when our young adult kids go off to college, they're 18 years old, they get into an accident, a car accident, and they land in the hospital. Little known fact, you as mom or dad don't have the ability to call the hospital and find out whether or not they are in the hospital, and if so, which room number they're in, unless you have certain documents in place. So we need to have a universal HIPAA release, medical directives, things like that. If one of our young adult kids gets into a situation where they can't pay their own bills for a little while, we have to have a financial power of attorney. And then once you're a little bit older, maybe you have children. Once we add children to the mix, you need to have documents in place that name a guardian in case something happens to you and their other parent. Most people don't think that they need to have something in place until they're much older, because we have this idea that nothing's going to happen to us today. We're probably going to live until we're at least 70, 80, 90. And so we don't need estate planning documents until we are much older. As we go through life, the need increases, with every passing day, because it's more and more likely that our time will come. We just don't know when that's going to be. So I will say I've had a lot of clients who've waited until their 80s or even 90s to get their estate plan done. And universally, what they have told me is you need to tell other people to do this earlier in life. I promise it won't make you die getting your estate planning documents done. There's kind of a feeling that if I talk about my mortality, something will happen to me. I think it's the opposite. It's like Murphy's Law. If you don't have it in place, then it's more likely to happen. So it's super important to get it done while you are healthy and able.
I totally understand that concept of not wanting to talk about it, because I'm almost 100% Irish, and all of my relatives don't want to deal with their demise. I myself would like to go at 88 within a couple of months of my wife. So hopefully that's in place. And I love the focus on beginning when they're 18, because you're right. If your child is away at school and something happens, they can't really share information with you unless that release is in place.
Right.
So
right.
If a young couple comes into you with a couple of kids, they've got good jobs, they're savers, describe that engagement. What would you do for that couple?
The first thing we do is we sit down and we talk about, what do you want? What do you want for yourselves? What do you want for your family? What is this all about for you? Because I think it's easy to get tripped up in the estate planning world, thinking about the documents that we talked about, the vehicles. Those are really just vehicles to get you somewhere. But the question is, where is the where? Where do you want to go? Where do you want your family to go? So if you think about, if you were taking a trip, you're planning a trip and you've saved up the money, you've planned your time off, now it's time to make your travel plans. You wouldn't decide on your vehicle, your mode of transportation, before you decide where you want to go, right? Are you going to the hotel down the street? Are you going to a nearby city? Or are you going to Hawaii? So that's where it starts with estate planning. What are the things that you're trying to accomplish for your family? What are the things that you're trying to avoid? And once we know that, we can start talking through how to get you there and what vehicles are going to be most important. So for us, the starting place is always, what's most important to you? What are you trying to create for your family? over the long run, and specifically after you're gone? What does thriving for your family look like? Because yes, it's nice to leave money to the coming generations, but money on its own doesn't really do anything. It's what do you want the money to do for your loved ones?
Right. And you may have 2 or 3 children that all have different attributes and maturity. And so the one may be irresponsible with money. I would like to put all that money in trust for them anyway and have a trustee that can parse out the DNI so that they can be responsible with it. But at some age, you have to, put the release on that. And hopefully at that point, they're mature enough to handle the wealth that you pass on.
Hopefully. Yes.
So beyond the financial piece of it, the emotional piece of doing the planning is so important. How do you help clients navigate that emotional process of, okay, what do I do with Susie, who's got a good job and a stable family, but my son Joey is, he's got some issues. So how do you talk through those things, and what do you suggest for those family situations?
Yeah. I'll say delicately, in a word, because these are tender issues for us as parents, or even aunts and uncles, for people who don't have children. And so it's really a gentle exploration of, once we get to know everything that you want to accomplish and avoid, then understanding each individual beneficiary's situation and what the goals are and what the concerns are for them. And then, that's where I think working with an attorney who has a lot of experience is helpful, because we've seen how things can go if you set it up, so that the money is going outright to somebody in this kind of situation or with these kinds of challenges. We already know what's likely to happen, and we can suggest other ways to play around that. And one of the big things that becomes important is making sure that we either treat each beneficiary in a similar way, or if we're not treating them in a similar way, we offer them a written explanation with the estate planning documents about why we treated them differently. And the most important thing for them to know is that this is not because I don't love you. It's because I do love you, and this is what I want for you. Because without fail, those adult children, when they're treated differently, the story in their head will be, I always knew that they loved Susie more than they loved me.
Yeah, that's so true. I mean, money changes a lot of things, but a lot of times you're not just saving them from themselves, but possibly a failed marriage or a failed business. And if those assets are in trust, they are protected from those either ex-spouses or creditors.
Yes, as long as they're in trust. And that's a big thing that people don't understand about estate planning. They think that if they have, let's say, a revocable living trust, which is the most common tool that we use these days, and the money gets paid outright to, let's say, my adult daughter, when that money gets paid out of the trust to her, and she's the only one named, that is not protected if she gets divorced down the road. And a lot of people think, well, I only named my daughter, so it should just be hers. And yes, in an ideal world, it would work that way. But what happens is she buys a house that they put into their joint names, or she puts it into their joint bank account, or they start a business together. And then when they split up, that money gets divided 50-50. And so we can put divorce protection into the trust. So as you mentioned, the money can stay in the trust under the control of my adult child. They can still buy the house, start the business, invest the money, but they do all of those things in the name of their trust share under my trust, so that the money is fully protected if they get divorced down the road.
Again, you're giving them a tool. They just have to use the tool correctly.
Exactly.
So I'm sure in your client base, like many client bases, you have a husband and wife come in, regardless of the age they come in, one is a little more financially sophisticated with respect to understanding what you do, and the other has a different skill set. I'm not making a judgment. It's just some people, think about these things and understand them, and some people have never really had any exposure to them. How does the output of what you give them, the set of documents and maybe a memorandum that explains what happens when certain events trigger, how does that give comfort to maybe the less sophisticated spouse when it comes to estate planning?
What a great question. Because I think that's almost universally true. There's one who's a little more savvy and experienced in these kinds of things. The first thing that we as attorneys have to do is slow it down and make sure that the person who has the least knowledge and experience understands what we're talking about. And then what we do is we have a video that we have recorded that walks through the entire estate plan in general terms in an educational way, so that we go through every different article in the trust, every different document that supports the trust, and we talk through in layman's terms exactly what this means and how it works. And then we have a class that all of our clients get signed up for. Once they sign their plan, they are invited, as are their successor trustees and or adult children, so that they can come. And once again, we go back through how everything works and what they need to do with it now, and what successor trustee will be doing whenever client cannot serve as trustee any longer. And so one of the things that we do at that time is we make sure that they understand the importance of funding. You mentioned that earlier. So many people have a revocable living trust in place and they don't ever get it funded. So when they sign their documents, we walk them through funding. When they come to this class, we walk them through funding, and we keep repeating that over and over again. And I think most people who aren't very familiar with how a revocable living trust works, it takes them a good year to understand what they've done and how it works. And we have ongoing classes for them. And then we have them come back in 12 months after they sign their trust. And at that point, they get to ask more questions. That's when everything really starts to gel together for the people who haven't had much experience before.
I love that approach. And it sounds very different than many estate planning firms. If you can explain it to the one who is less sophisticated, then you've explained it to both. And then you follow up with the video and the classes. I mean, that follow-up is key, because it's not just go pay your fee, put the documents in the safe deposit box or the drawer and forget it. There's a checklist of things that have to happen. And that 12-month meeting you're having is following up on that. That's awesome.
Yeah. I think my experience as a very young, naive layperson at 22 in the lawyer's office has been helpful, because I know how much one can come into this not knowing. I knew about as little as one could know.
So let's get into the business of your law firm. How do you charge for what you do? Is it hourly, fixed fee, or what's your thought process on that?
Yeah, virtually everything that we do is flat fee. People, our clients these days don't like to pay hourly fees, at least not in our world. And so we have a standard flat fee, and we have a couple of tiers. One, if you're giving everything outright when you pass away, and another tier if you are creating ongoing trusts for your beneficiaries. So that keeps it simple. Sometimes people do things that are a little more complex, and we spend a lot more time on a particular plan. And most often that's with somebody who does not have children. And then, and they always think that their situation is more simple because they don't have children. But then they have 28, charities and cousins, and for each one of them, we're doing things differently. So we try to do flat fees as much as we possibly can. There are a few areas where we end up charging hourly fees, but with most estate planning, it's flat fee.
Well, let me ask you a question. You're in a flat fee environment. for the most part. Do you track your time in order to judge the validity of the flat fee you're charging?
We do not, but we do know on average how much time we spend. And so we do that analysis typically once a year just to make sure that our fees are where they should be.
Yeah, I think you almost have to do that because otherwise your flat fee might be not appropriately set. I mean, we at Anders VCFO Services are a flat fee subscription based model, but we do track time just so that we can, we realize that activity levels will go up and down on a monthly cadence, but over time, if you're on that trend line, you're pricing it correctly. So
right.
The fact that you're looking at it at least on an annual basis would help validify the fee that you're charging. What about when client they've come in, they paid their flat fee, you've updated it over the years, and now they pass away and there's an estate tax return to do? Is that flat fee as well?
So we don't do any of the tax returns at this point, but we work with CPAs to do those. So,
okay. And that brings up another point about collaboration. What you and I do in the estate planning area is really important that we don't do it in a vacuum. So how do you work with their insurance person, their CPA, any other advisors that they have?
As collaboratively as possible. So on the front end, when a client first hires us, one of the questions that we ask is, who is your financial advisor? Who is your CPA? And then if the financial advisor wants to be involved in the initial estate planning process, we do involve them. But typically we just send them a letter. So some financial advisors want to sit in on the estate planning meetings. Most do not. And what we do is we send them a letter recapping all of our funding instructions if somebody creates a revocable living trust, so that they know what we have recommended in terms of exactly which assets get funded into the trust and who the specific beneficiary designations are, so that the financial advisor can assist them with that. For some situations, we're naming the trust as a beneficiary. For some situations, we're not naming the trust as a beneficiary. It just depends.
I love the approach to collaboration. And if the financial advisor or the CPA didn't want to be involved, they probably don't have the right other members of the team. Everybody needs to know what's going on in the best interest of the client, and that sharing of information can help serve that best interest of the client. Absolutely. What other errors do you see that people make other than, I don't want to plan, I don't want to think about my demise? What other things can you point out that they should be thinking about? So the biggest one that comes to my mind is just focusing on the money, because studies show that there's something else that's more important than the money. And in fact, it's 10 times more important than the money to our adult kids. And that is not the financial capital, but the human capital. So your wisdom, your life stories, your love passed on in tangible ways so that your loved ones still have those with them even after you're gone. So I've created a system to help our clients discover and cultivate all of that so that they can pass their human capital to the coming generations. I'm just wrapping up a 6-month session one-on-one with an amazing couple who we're putting together a family legacy letter that tells their entire life stories. It shares their values. It shares the wisdom, all of the challenges that they've gone through, their hard-won wisdom, what they wish they would have known when they were younger, and their hopes and dreams for the coming generations. And this is a document that we are, professionally printing, and will be there as a resource for their grandchildren, great-grandchildren, great-great-grandchildren, all the generations down, to have somebody from the previous generations who loved them before they were even a twinkle in their parents' eyes, guiding them through life. I love that process because they're telling their story, passing it on, preserving it, and also passing on their values. I have
Yeah.
a family that's very charitable, and they wanted to ensure that the children and grandchildren, the children were charitable too, because they just watched this their entire life, but they
Mm.
wanted to get that into the hands of the grandchildren. So what they did was they said, look, if you have charities that you care about, we will match your gifts. And they started bringing them to the quarterly meetings where they talked about who the family was going to give to, so that the grandkids, then they were adult grandkids, 18 and up, but they could understand why grandma and grandpa were giving to certain charities. But then they also said, hey, whatever you kids are interested in, let us know and we will match those gifts as well. So they were passing on the
Oh,
charitable values in that way.
that's so beautiful, and really honoring the humanity and personhood of each of the younger generation. The charities that you care about matter too.
Well, and they were telling him, look, we're very blessed to have what we have, and we need to take care of other people. It's just, I love all those things where you're trying to pass grandparents' wisdom on to the grandchildren.
Yeah.
Hey, I know that you are from the Colorado Springs area, and I want to ask you, if you had a 4-day trip, would the ideal trip be hiking in the mountains or in a hot spring somewhere, and why?
For me, it is absolutely hiking in the mountains. I have grandchildren in Los Angeles and grandchildren in Hawaii. And so I visit those places, and then I very happily go back and hike in the mountains of Colorado. I'm a cool weather person. So I think there must be some mountain lineage in my ancestry, but I'm very much a mountain girl.
That's awesome. Catherine, if listeners want to get a hold of you, how can they do that?
You can find us online at coloradoestateplan.com. And we've got all of our contact information there.
That's perfect. Catherine, it was a pleasure discussing your approach to estate planning today. To learn more about Catherine and her practice, please visit the show notes. I'm John Scott with Anders VCFO Services, and thank you for joining us today on Judicial Dollars and Cents. We will see you next time. Thank you. Thanks for joining us on Judicial Dollars and Cents, presented by Anders Virtual CFO Services. If you found value in today's conversation, be sure to follow or subscribe wherever you get your podcast. To learn more about how Anders helps law firms strengthen their financial foundations and drive growth, visit anderscpa.com. Until next time, keep making smart decisions that make perfect sense.